Well, hey, everybody. Happy Thursday. Happy February. Hope you're doing well. We're getting ready to record episode 33 of Mike in the Midwest. We're going to talk about a show topic that I like. It's called podcasting. So, if you've ever wanted to know what goes into the workflow of the podcast, we are diving into it today. All right, let us get rocking here. Looks like everything is set, and let us do this. Welcome to episode number 33 of Mike in the Midwest, a mini podcast for our amazing patrons of the Be Our Guest podcast. Happy Thursday to you. We're happy whatever day you are listening to the show here. So glad to have you here. And I appreciate you for being a huge fan of the Be Our Guest podcast, supporting us. It means the world. I don't get to say that enough on the regular shows. I try to make sure I mention it at the top and the bottom of each show. But if you are here supporting the podcast, thank you sincerely for that. We're going to pull through this, and you guys are making it happen. You're kind of carrying us that bridge from last March to hopefully this summer. Things will start turning around, getting back to normal, and we can just get back to how we've done things forever. You know, I always want to keep everything free. Don't want to exclude anybody from anything. Just giving us your time to listen to the show. Just hearing Pam, Ricky, and I, and sometimes hashtag Scotty G, sitting here and just talking about our favorite things. You know, Walt Disney World, memories with our families, our friends, sometimes sailing on the Disney Cruise Line, other adventures, and also last night I was recording one of our podcasts for a Monday show, for a trip report show. And those are a bit different. And actually, I'm going to dive into that today. Our topic is going to be about putting on the podcast. What does a week look like behind the scenes for the Be Our Guest podcast? What goes into the shows? What do I do once I close the mic? What do I do before I start the live feed? Stuff like that. We're going to be talking about putting on the podcast, all the mechanics of everything. But I just really enjoyed doing these shows, and I thank you for letting me do that. You are absolutely the person right here that is monetarily letting us keep all this stuff going, because the more listeners we get, and we've gotten a lot over the years, we've been blessed in that case. But the more listeners you get with the podcast, the more it costs, because more folks are downloading your show. It takes more bandwidth. The host asks for more, and you can compromise your stream quality, but I never want to do that. So I make sure that the experience is always going to be first rate for everybody. So you guys are letting us do that. So thank you so much. So today, again, we're going to be talking about putting on a podcast, all the mechanics behind the scenes of that. But before we dive into the topic, I kind of wanted to go back over last week's. It was kind of the start of what's going to be probably 2 or 3 different shows on that topic. I called it From BBS to Podcast. And I went all the way back to getting my Commodore 64 in like 1984, 1983. And how I started, swapping games with friends on floppy disks, 5 1/4 discs, and then calling BBSs, which were bulletin board services, which was a way to interact with other folks in St. Louis. Not in real time, but it seemed like real time back in the day. You could post a message or messages on a BBS and then leave them there, save them, and then somebody else would log in and read your message, and then they could post the next thing in the thread, and then you would log back in, you would call, dial up on a phone, and read the new messages, respond, and it was a back and forth. It was a way to communicate and exchange ideas, also software, but it was a lot of fun back in the day. I look back on it very nostalgically. If that was around today, would I do that again? Probably not, because really what it was a glorified vBulletin message board, which is a lot more efficient, and you don't have to dial in. Everybody can be online at the exact same time anywhere on the planet. You were kind of restricted to your area code back in those days to avoid the long distance charges. So it was very, very limited, but it was the first step to that larger world of getting out there and interacting with other Commodore fans. In that case, there was also Apple, like 2E message boards. There were Tandy TRS-80 message boards, stuff like that. So it did allow you to kind of get your Commodore 64 past your bedroom or your living room into a larger world. But typically that larger world was your city, your area code. And if you think about how far we've come at this point, it is pretty amazing. So I'm going to jump into that because I didn't get all the way to how we got from the BBS, calling BBSs, and then I ran a BBS, and I want to give some stories about running a BBS as a kid, to how that translates directly into having a podcast and why those two are so similar. So we'll get into that, but I didn't want to, I know not everybody's a big nerd like me, and some of you guys might be like, oh, I don't want to hear about that. So we're going to kind of leave that on the back burner for a week or two and then jump back in. And again, if you guys have anything you want me to talk about here on Thursdays, I'm always looking for show topics. So if you have anything you want me to discuss, please, please, please just email mike@beourguestpodcast.com. Let me know, and I will talk about that for 30 minutes and we'll have a show. Because this show's all about you. Also, I'd like to do an Ask Me Anything. So if you have any questions, anything you want to know, just let me know. All right, let's get into the feedback from last week's show. It was episode 32, from BBS to podcast. Michael Corbett says, and thank you so much for being a patron, Michael. I appreciate that. Michael says, I'm about 10 years older than you, and I started teaching computer science and applications at a junior high school in the fall of 1988. Okay, so yeah, I would have been in 19. I'm not trying to make anybody sound old because I'm old, but in 1988, I would have been in 8th grade. So I'd have been at my last year of middle school. For the first 5 years, I taught on Apple IIe's. They had 5.25-inch floppy drives and no hard drive. That was how my computer was. I did not get into BBS stuff much, but I remember going to a training to learn about this thing called the internet. We learned to search using a browser called Mosaic. For the most part, we had to know the web address we wanted to go to because searching was very limited. By the way, I had one of those books that had the program listings in it. Students who finished early could borrow it and try typing in the code. There were always typos that made by the students, but a number of the programs also had bugs in the code. I'm still teaching computer science 32, CS, so computer science 32 and a half years later. Wow, that's awesome. Of course, things have changed a lot. Next year, I'll be teaching Python to our 9th graders and another programming class to 8th graders. I really enjoyed this episode and hope that you will let me share parts of it with my students. Michael Corbett, he's in Lehi, Utah. Absolutely. And I would, Michael, if you want me to talk to your students, I mean, not that I have much to share, but that would be an honor. But yeah, definitely let them know. Because again, you're out in Utah. I was in Missouri. Things are probably similar and different. But yeah, I would be honored, and any way I can help, always, that goes for everybody here in the patron audience. Anything I can do to help teachers, anybody else out there, business folks, if I can help, just give me a yell. You're helping me. I want to help you right back. My good friend, Dennis Keithley, down in Texas, I believe. Why am I drawing a blank on that? I know the force is with him though. Thanks for being a patron, Dennis. I love this episode, he says. It brought back so many memories. I had a Commodore 64 as well as a kid. I was part of a ring of friends that would copy and share games for years. I know, right? The feds are coming after us. That's kind of a funny aside. Let me just step away from Dennis's email real quick. The funny thing is okay, everybody copied games on the Commodore 64. It wasn't, and it was illegal, right? It was pirating games. It was not legal. And we kind of all knew that at the time. We're probably like 10, 11, 12. And I'm kind of a nervous Nelly as it was. And I mean, the whole thing was, you would always hear these rumors at middle school that, one kid got hauled away like downtown St. Louis to the FBI headquarters. And they were, going after him, and they were going to get everybody, they're going to have him write down all the people's names and addresses that he's ever copied games with. And it was one of those things that we had, I probably had 400 or 500 floppy drives or floppy disks. And I'm not exaggerating because I was really into this, full of downloaded and copied software. I rarely had like a store-bought copy. I probably had 10 programs that were bought from the store from right when I got my Commodore. I had a couple cartridges too, but most of my stuff was copied. And that's how all my friends were too. I mean, we all had copied software. But the thing was, like, back in the day, man, you were always like nervous that, the feds were going to come, like a SWAT team. Yeah, that's how you pictured it in your dreams, right? Like there'd be like 12 SWAT people outside your house, like going to take you out because you copied, one copy of Summer Games. I don't know. All right, let's see. Back to Dennis's feedback. Some of his favorite games were Bruce Lee, Ghostbusters. I love Ghostbusters. Spy Hunter. I love Spy. I still remember that. And Mule. Summer Games was fun to. Yes, I played all kinds of summer games. At the very beginning. Yeah, platform diving I think was my favorite. It says We played that a lot too, but I remember nearly destroying the joystick, moving it back and forth really fast to get my swimmer or runner to move faster. Yes, I tore up some joysticks. I would also code the games using the instructions from magazines or books. That was always painful if it wouldn't work right because you made some minor error somewhere in the code. And then you would have to go back and check every single line until you found the mistake. Great episode, Mike. Absolutely. Kids do not know how easy they have it. I had this thick book and all it was programs. You would type in like for hours to get this stupid little River Raid type game with just like cursor, characters. But you know what? We played it and we liked it. That's it. Megan Green. How you doing, Megan and the boys? She says, I'm a little younger, so I missed out on the days of having to type all the code into the computer to play a game. But my first computer was an MS-DOS computer where you had to use all the prompts to get everything up and running. I played hours and hours of Oregon Trail and loved every minute of it. Yeah. Wasn't playing Oregon Trail at school like you were getting away with murder. Like, I'm at school and I'm playing a game until you died of dysentery. Right? Everybody died of dysentery. So thanks for the feedback. If you have feedback, please leave that under the one of the two streams, of the audio or the YouTube video stream, and I'll share it on next week's show. Lots of fun, lots of good memories. I'm glad other people have the same memories because that's really what the gist of this podcast is about. I mean, if you think about our Be Our Guest podcast, it's not serious. We're talking about vacations. We're talking about having a good time. Like nothing's life or death with what we do at Walt Disney World. We just go down there and we eat, we ride rides, we listen to music, go see shows, ride on, boats and monorails and sky buckets and stuff. We've talked almost 2,000 episodes about that, and it's not that serious. This show's like 10 degrees less serious than the Be Our Guest podcast. Just memories and just, trying to get together once a week to kind of reminisce and bring back some of the good times. All right. So today I've had a lot of requests for the show over the years, like even before we had the Patreon, to put this out on the podcast feed. And to be honest, I've never really, felt comfortable with doing a podcast about the podcast. The podcast always want to be about the content. When somebody finds our podcast, it's typically because they're looking to get content, about Walt Disney World. They want to plan a better trip, or they want to reminisce about other people's trips because they're a little homesick for their favorite place and they can't get back right now. So that's kind of always the goal of the Be Our Guest podcast. But I thought, this is a good opportunity to spend about 20 minutes kind of talking about what it looks like behind the scenes for the Be Our Guest podcast and kind of a little history and kind of how things have evolved since 2008. So I just want to, this is going to be, I didn't take any serious notes on this. I just wanted to share some of the things I've learned and things that have come up doing the show. So we are going to, let's start first of all with, when you have a podcast, one of the things you need is obviously you need equipment, and you don't need a ton of equipment to start. You can have very little equipment to start. You can actually just record audio on your phone. If you have an iPhone, there's an app called Voice Memos. You can record that. The phones on an iPhone or the microphones on an iPhone right now are amazing. So you can just take that audio, upload it up to a host, and send it out. So let me kind of really quick walk you through how a podcast works. If you don't know, which you probably do. A podcast is really just an audio or video file. That's all we do is we record a video file together, Pam, Ricky, and I. So you record this file. I'll get into how we do that. But you record the file and you have to send it out. What makes it a podcast, instead of like just emailing you the file, that would be a way to get you the audio. But the way a podcast works, what makes a podcast, the secret sauce, is what's called an RSS feed. It stands for Real Simple Syndication. And all that means is when you go to a place like, say Apple Podcasts, or you go to Pocket Casts, if that's I use Pocket Casts to listen to shows. If you listen on Stitcher or TuneIn or iHeartRadio, anywhere where you hit that subscribe button, the subscribe button is really the delineation of what makes it a podcast. Because what that does is that app on your phone, or that app or computer program on your desktop or your laptop, what it does, it'll go out and check that feed, or go out and look for that subscription. You can set it how often. I have mine check every hour. So every hour it's going to ping, hey, is there a new Be Our Guest podcast? Nope. Okay. Nothing happens. Whoa. It's Thursday night. The Friday night show just came out. Yes, there is. And it'll automatically download it. That's what makes it a podcast, which is really a cool thing, because you subscribe one time. It's just like this with Mike in the Midwest. You have to have kind of that secret link because it's a patron podcast. But once you have that, as soon as I publish this here in like 45 minutes, boom, the next time your agent or your app looks, you will find it'll find this file and it'll automatically serve it right to your phone or your desktop, wherever you have the program, and you're good to go. It takes all the trouble out of it. You just pull out your device, look at your list. That's what I do every morning before I get on the treadmill. I get up, I put on my shoes, and I open up a Pocket Cast, and I look, okay, what do I get overnight? And then I just sort them. I put them in a certain order that I want to listen to them that day, and I'm gone. Downloads them automatically, and I'm set. So that's really what makes a podcast. Okay, so particularly with the Be Our Guest podcast, let's kind of talk about what we do and what the setup we have here. So what I have here, and thank you to folks in the live chat that are joining us. I'm glad that you're enjoying the podcast talk. So what I have here, this is the current setup, is that I'm using a desktop HP computer. I know a lot of folks use laptops. I have bad eyes. So I have a desktop computer with two 32-inch monitors. So it's very big. So I can see and read the, Wednesdays, so I can read the listener questions and so forth. But basically what we do the way we record. So we record, if we record the Wednesday and Friday shows, Pam, Ricky, and I. We record the Wednesday and Friday shows every Monday at about 5:45 is when we go live. We get together usually at about 5:30 to kind of talk for about 15 minutes about what's going on. We catch up on stuff, and then we hit the live button. So before we ever do that, I come down and we text. Obviously, we don't do a whole lot of planning, but we'll text throughout the week on show ideas. We use just iMessage to talk back and forth. We have a group chat, and that's where we'll talk about, what do we want to talk about on Monday for the shows? And we only have to talk about, what the topic is for Friday, because Wednesday is always listener questions, which is a piece of cake. Thanks for always sending the questions. We just kind of pull out, when you send a listener question in, I put it in a folder, and then I just go through and pick out the most pertinent ones to the most amount of listeners. And if we have the same question over and over, I'll just pull somebody's and use that one for everybody. Anyway, so what happens is, before we start recording on Mondays, I come down about 4:15 my time, 5:15 Eastern, and I start to get everything set. So what does that mean to get the podcast set to record? Because we record those back-to-back shows. So first of all, I have to get the software running that records the audio. Now, if you're ever going to do your own podcast, and I've learned this from other podcasters like Leo Laporte, he does a bunch of tech podcasts, and I'm a huge fan because his quality is outstanding. I've also learned this from my dad, who works as a radio engineer. Here's the tip: audio always wins. You got to have good audio on a podcast, even if you're doing a video podcast. With a video podcast, if you have terrible audio, people will tune out right away. Video is always secondary. Audio is always first. So that's why we don't really worry about. I got a new backdrop with the Patreon money. It was like $18 just to kind of make things look better. So hopefully you enjoy that, like the Spaceship Earth behind me. But basically, the audio is just kind of for fun. So you can kind of see what it looks like behind the scenes. The audio is where it's at. The video is just kind of secondary. But anyway, so what happens is, before we start recording, I come down and I fire up some software that's called Cool Edit Pro. That's what I record the audio on. Now, this is a super old program. My desktop computer that I'm recording this on is about 10 years old. It is older than dirt. Still running Windows 7, by the way, because it's stable. I'm also a big fan of, if something is stable, don't mess with it. So I'm running an old machine with big dual monitors. I run a program called Cool Edit Pro, and that records the audio. Right now I'm looking at it. It's got the, the waves and so forth. Now, this program you can still get today, but it is now called Adobe Audition. They bought this company, and that became Adobe Audition, which you got to subscribe to. So if you ever want, it's a super simple program to use. So that's what I use to record the audio. So I get that loaded up, good to go. Then the way we record live on Facebook and YouTube to get Ricky and Pam and the video and everybody, we use a program called BeLive. It's a subscription service where we just log into their site, BeLive.tv, and we've connected our YouTube channel. We've connected our Facebook page. And basically what I do every week is, when we're ready, I send a link via email to Pam and Ricky. They click on the link and they come right in, and they're right there live. And so while we're recording live on Facebook and YouTube, in the background, I'm recording with Adobe, or I have Cool Edit Pro running, and that's how I get the audio. So basically we have the video archived on the YouTube and the Facebook pages. I'm recording a straight audio track at the same time. in the background. And I have that so that when we're done, automatically, immediately the file's up on YouTube and Facebook. The video is available. You can get that 5 minutes later. Then I have a straight just audio file, which then I edit to put out on the podcast feed. So that's kind of how we do that. Now, back before we started doing video, we've been doing video for about 4 years. We used to just use Skype, and it was the same thing. I'd load up a Cool Edit Pro to record the audio. I would just basically call Ricky and Pam on Skype. It wasn't on the phone. I called them on their computers, but it sounded pretty good. So if you don't want to use video, using Skype is a good alternative, because we did that for a good 7 or 8 years. Skype can wear you out sometimes, but it was a good way to get started. And you can even use video on Skype. Some people are even using Zoom nowadays to just record the Zoom video. And then again, all you really need to do is record your audio in a separate program like Adobe Audition. Some people use Audacity. If you have a Mac, you can use GarageBand. Those are both free options. I just use this program because my dad taught me how to use this, because this is what they use at the radio station. Okay, so we record the audio and I save it immediately, because the last thing you want to do is lose your file. So as soon as we get done, I get done, we'll see you real soon. Boom, I hit the stop button. First thing I do, even if Ricky starts talking, Pam starts talking, while they're talking, I'm going in and saving the raw file immediately with all the mess ups, with everything in it. Because as long as I have that raw file, I'm good. Then what I do after that, we record both shows, and I have 2 big files of just us talking, the audio. So after that, what I do is you go into the same program that Cool Edit Pro, and it's a multi-track editor. So what I do is, right after we finish the Friday show, I edit the Friday show first, because it's already loaded, because it was the second show we recorded. It's still in the memory. It's still, on the screen. So the next thing I do in my workflow is that's when I record the pre-read for before the show. Welcome, happy Friday, everybody. Thanks for downloading and streaming the Be Our Guest podcast, that thing. And I give the ad read. So I record that little 1 minute and 30 second kind of little piece. I get that recorded. So now I have 2 files. I have the intro. I have the pre-read, and I have the body of the show. Then I have my 2 intros and outros. And those are the ones that have the Phantasmic music at the beginning and the Illuminations music at the end. The gentleman who says, all in the radio voice, his name's Billy Greenwood, and he recorded those for us back in 2008. He worked with my dad down at 103.3 KLOU in St. Louis. My dad worked at the oldie station, but if you know anything about radio right now, a lot of radio stations have just 5 or 6 stations all in the same building, even on the same floor. So I have just studios down the hall. Well, Billy Greenwood was the afternoon country music station guy, and he's actually on a bunch of radio stations. He does one in Atlanta, but he doesn't go by Billy Greenwood. I think he was in 17 markets last time I heard. I don't even know if he's still in St. Louis, to be honest, but that's who does our show open and show close. He did it absolutely for free. This is a favorite of my dad. And man, I've used the crud out of that intro and outro. I just love it because, he was a cool guy. He's a cool guy to record that. And I think here on the Patreon, if you go back, I posted all the raw stuff that he recorded for us, because I just put some copy together. Again, I'd only been doing the show for like 3 weeks at this point. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know what I wanted to do with the podcast. I put all this script together real quick and emailed it to my dad. He read all this stuff, and just that's when I cut it up. I chopped it up into pieces, put it all together so it sounded kind of cohesive, put the Phantasmic music behind it, and we had an intro. So what I do, and then I did the same for the outro. So what I do is I pull those up every time, load those up. So now I have 4 files. I have the long audio file from the podcast, from the recording. I have the ad read at the top, and then I have my intros and my outros. The last thing that I got to do is pull up a music bed, right? We always have some kind of background loop or something in the background. So I have a hard drive just full of Walt Disney World music beds. And I'll be honest, I know some people are like, what, you played an Illumination, you played Interventions, and you didn't even talk about Epcot in that show. The show was all about the studios. I don't give it a lot of thought for that. It's kind of what strikes me in the mood. So sometimes I feel a little Epcot. Sometimes I feel Tower of Terror background loop. Sometimes I feel Toy Story Land. Sometimes I feel Main Street USA. Sometimes Fantasyland. It just depends. Sometimes it's Resort TV background loops. I don't know. I have a bunch, but I try to make it sound, pleasant. And also maybe that background loop will stir a memory for you and you'll be like, oh God, I remember that time I was at Pop Century and we had it on that background channel with just the PowerPoint and the WDW Today channel. And that's what I hope happens for you. So it's fun. It is so fun. So now at this point, I've got all my files, and then basically it's just a jigsaw, right? I go into track one, I drop in the ad read at the top. Then in track two, I scroll out till that gets to the end. I put in the intro, the one by Billy Greenwood. Then I come in with the background loop under that to start as soon as we get done with that intro. Then I put in the body of the show. That's track four. Then I go to the end of the show. Track five is the closing. It's that simple. And then what you do is once you get all five of them lined up, you listen to how they all blend together. You just hit a button called mix down. And what it does, it takes all five files, mixes them down into one large file. And there you go. You have it. Last thing I have to do is I have to add the album art, which is the little logo for the Be Our Guest podcast. That's one of the things I couldn't figure out how to do for ages. And then I figured out just use iTunes. So then I put in the Be Our Guest podcast logo, save it. And then the next part, it's really not that hard. We use a host called Podbean, which is kind of expensive, but when we started in 2008, there weren't a whole lot of options. Right now, there's a ton of options because it's 13 years later and everybody in the world has a podcast. But I use a host called Podbean, and they're really good. They do a great job for us, and they're not that expensive, really. They're probably lower tier, to be honest. So I go over there and I log into our host, our account, and then I just hit add new episode and it asks for the file. So at this point, I've got my mixed down file, one file. It's got the logo on it and everything. I upload that. Then you just title your show and you put a show description. So that body, if you go to beourguestpodcast.podbean.com, or if you just go to beourguestpodcast.com, you'll see the description of the show. So you type that all in. And then you got to put in some metadata. You got to put in the length of the show. You got to put in the episode number, stuff like that. But I mean, it takes like 3 minutes to upload and publish. And then what I do is I schedule, obviously, our shows to release at certain times because I record on Mondays. We record the Wednesday and Friday shows. So I just edit them down, upload them. And then I say, and again, this is old school, but I release the Friday show on Thursday night at 9:00 Eastern. I release the Wednesday show on Tuesday night at 9:00 Eastern. And I release the Monday show on Sunday night at 9:00 Eastern. And again, the reasoning for that, it's just because we've been doing it that way since we started, because our show is so old that people didn't used to have wireless syncing to their phones or their devices. When we started, most people listened on an iPod. And so what you would do, the reasoning why I released them the night before is that when you got up on Monday morning, Wednesday morning, or Friday morning, the new show would be sitting on your computer. Usually it was on a desktop computer back in those days. You just leave iTunes running. And so you'd have the newest episode on your Monday morning when you got up. The newest Be Our Guest podcast was sitting there on your iTunes. So then what you would do, this is what I did. Before I got into the shower every day before I went to school, I would take my iPod, and I had the classic iPod, the 80 gig big monster with the click wheel. I would take that with like the 30-pin connector and plug it into my desktop computer, and it would sync. And I did that every day while I took a shower. So then when I got out of the shower, boom, my iPod had all my podcasts, WDW Today, Inside the Magic. Oh my gosh, there's so many of them from back. I should pull that out and see the ones I used to listen to. But I'd have all my podcasts and I would just be like, oh my gosh, I'm getting these for free and it's about Disney. I was the happiest person ever. So then I would listen to those on the way to school. I'd listen to them on my plan period while I was grading papers. I mean, I kind of fell in love with podcasting, just listening to podcasts. I would say in about 2005 or 2006 and never stopped. Like it's 2021 and I'm still as in love with podcasting as ever. It's a great medium to be able to meet people and get your ideas out there and listen to other people's ideas, which I think is just as important. That's basically it for putting together the podcast. If I had to give some tips, because I was doing a talk with some folks out in Kansas last week about podcasting. I was actually asked to be a special guest and it was a big honor. I got to talk to a couple hundred folks about podcasting. One of the tips I would say, obviously audio always wins. Be a podcast fan. Listen to different podcasts in different genres. I listen to a few Disney podcasts, but most shows I listen to are not Disney shows. And so that gives me different ways to think about podcasting. I know ours is very much the same. It's very patterned because I'm kind of that way, but I also get tips and ideas from other folks who do their shows. Finally, another thing is just be consistent with your shows. I never want to miss a podcast. I think you've probably noticed that. I will do everything I can to make sure that if you're going to give us the time to listen, I'm going to give you my best shot every show 3-4 times a week because it's an exchange, right? It's a trade-off. You are giving us time that is super, super valuable. And I want to, in exchange for that, I want to make sure I give you a great show every time, or the best show I can do. I don't know if it's great, but it's the best that I can do every time. And I don't want you to go there and say, oh man, that show's not there today. Because when I have podcasts like that, and sometimes they go away for months. And then I get sad, right? I'm like, oh man, I wish I knew what happened. Like I'm missing that show. So I don't want you to miss us. Real quick, I thought I would go through just because, talk about being a podcast fan. Here's an example of some of the shows I listen to right now. So let me just pull this up here. Let's see here. I use if you're looking, I use Pocket Casts. So some of the shows I listen to are This Week in Tech by Leo Laporte. Mac Break Weekly is another Apple fan podcast. Gives all kinds of tips of using Apple devices. That's also by Leo Laporte. I listen to Wedway Radio. Obviously, Nate and Matt. I listen to a show called The Negative Splits. It's some guys up in Buffalo that are just buddies that run, and they're pretty funny. It's once a week. It's very casual. They're just about running. I listen to a podcast called News AF. It's called Actual Factual News. It's just news around the internet, just crazy stories like about Subway not having tuna this week in their sub sandwiches, just stuff that doesn't make sense. It's by Rob Sesternino, who was once on Survivor, and Tyson Apostle, who was on Survivor, and one other guy. I listen to the 3028. Obviously, it's Matt and Kevin. I listen to a show called The Retroist, which is about retro things. You Don't Know Flack. This is just a guy in Oklahoma that talks about all of his retro memories, kind of the same stuff, running a Commodore 64 BBS, his skateboarding phase in middle school, when he was a ninja, when he went to karate class. It's totally random stuff, but I love it. I listen to the Atari 2600 Game by Game podcast. Throwback reviews. I listen to, let's see any other ones on here. That's really about my consistent ones that I listen to. So the thing is, I listen to some very polished shows like This Week in Tech by Leo Laporte. Very polished, very professional, $1 million podcast network that he puts on. That's great. But this You Don't Know Flack show is just a guy he's kind of like me. It's just a guy in his house talking about memories. And I like that too. I like that podcasting is both ends of the spectrum, very professional, and then very much just somebody with a microphone and a computer and just sharing what they have to say. I love it all. So that's kind of a week in the Be Our Guest podcast, how things get together. If you ever have any questions about if you're starting a podcast or if you are doing a podcast and you need to know, like, well, how do you get this done? Or like, what's your idea on this? Not that I have all the answers, but I would love to help. Just let me know. Again, I'd love to hear about it. Put your comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on anything you have to say, and also a show topic for next week. That would be great. All right, guess what? I get to go to Mizzou tonight to see the women's basketball team play against Arkansas. Paige is getting us some free tickets. I haven't been out that way this year, so we get to go see a basketball game out in Columbia tonight. So excited for that. Actually get to get out of the house for a few hours. Yes. All right. So hope everybody is doing great. Thanks again for being a patron. Thanks for being there. And thank you so much for your friendship and your support of the show. It means so much. So you all stay safe, stay healthy, and we'll see you real soon. See you, everybody.